Hey there, Legal Tea listeners. This is your host, Jenny Roselle. Welcome back for another episode of Legal Tea today. It's a current trends topic where we talk about things going on currently that are relevant and pertinent to my estate and elder law world, and or maybe things I've seen on the news or stumbled across on social media. Well, on today's episode, it involves a name that everyone knows, Taylor Swift. So Taylor Swift has a song and it's called Anti-Hero. Unless you have lived under a rock, I am certain you have heard of this song, even if it's on the radio. It plays in grocery stores, at sports games. Even if you don't recognize the song name, you would very likely recognize the song if you heard it. Anyway, in this Anti-Hero song, she has a few lines in it that read or sing, and I'm not going to sing to save your ears. It reads as followed. I have this dream. My daughter-in-law kills me for the money. She thinks I left them in the will. My family gathers round and reads it, and then someone screams out, she's laughing up at us from hell. I had not really paid too much attention to the words of the song until one day I was in the car and traveling to one of our other office locations, and I was sort of mindlessly listening. That part of the song happened, and I was like, did I just hear what I think I heard? So of course I get to my destination and eagerly start Googling the lyrics, and son of a gun, I did hear it right. And anytime I hear little things like this, I always think, ooh, I could talk about this on my podcast. And it hit me, light bulb, I could just talk about the Slayer's Rule in light of what the lyrics say. So what is the Slayer's Rule, Jenny? Well, in much less legalese, the Slayer's Rule basically says that you cannot murder someone and benefit from them like in terms of an inheritance. You cannot gain something by murdering them. And that's obviously bad. And it makes sense. Like, we don't want people in tough times and thinking, well, heck, grandma's 95 years old and it's time for her to go because I need some money. Like, that's awful, right? Well, now this infamous Slayer's Rule is present in every state, but every state handles and kind of processes the rule in conjunction with their respective estate law by their respective state laws. Though, if I had to guess, I bet every state is fairly similar because the main principle is that we're trying to keep in mind is what I just said, that we don't want people to think it is socially acceptable to murder then inherit from who they just murdered. So some states call it the Slayer's Rule, some states call it the Slayer Statute. It's kind of tomato kind of thing. For sake of this podcast being based in the state of Indiana, I primarily focused on things on how this state deals with this rule, the Slayer's Rule, here in Indiana, which can be found under our Indiana Code probate code. And specifically, it deals with this sort of thing kind of uniquely. And actually, in 1983, a case went to the Court of Appeals here in Indiana to kind of test how the Indiana Slayer's Rule works. Now, that case was Turner versus Estate of Turner. And just so we're clear and get a firm understanding of things, let's talk a little bit about the facts and what happened in this case so that we can better grasp the Slayer's Rule. So in this case, a son, Alan, shot and killed his parents in Johnson County, Indiana. The son, the following day, was charged with their murders. Through all the hustle-bustle, Alan was actually found not responsible for the deaths by reason of insanity. Now, this is an important thing to remember as we get through this episode. So while he was charged, he was not convicted. So talking about the parents' estate, it was uncovered that his parents did not have an estate plan. No wills, no trust, nothing. So their estate went by the intestate laws, which are laws that govern when someone passes away without a will. And those laws say their estate goes to their 3 children, Linda, Janet, and Alan. Alan, the latter being the one that killed them. So after their parents passed away, Linda and Janet were appointed by the court as the estate's executors. And once the initial paperwork shuffle was done, Linda and Janet, as executors, asked the court to terminate Alan's right to inherit any portion of their parents' estate, and therefore they were saying that he should not receive his share given what he did. And they made this argument based on Indiana's version of the Slayer's Rule. The court heard their argument and sided with them, meaning that the court said, nope, Alan does not get anything given what he did. Well, Alan appealed their decision to try and get a different outcome. Would you believe me if I told you that the Court of Appeals did come to a different conclusion and said that Alan should be entitled to his share of his parents' estate? Believe it, because that's exactly what happened. Why? Well, what they hung their hat on was that our state's Slayer's Rule requires an actual conviction. And here, Alan was not convicted. He was charged, but ultimately found not guilty by reason of insanity. So they basically said that because of his lack of conviction, the Slayer's Rule is not applicable. The court, in coming to their decision, analyzed several other states' decisions with similar facts. In New Jersey, at least according to a 1983 decision, not sure if New Jersey has changed their statutes since then, New Jersey Slayer's Rule requires a showing that the killing was intentional. Though, in a New Jersey case that interpreted this statute, they found that someone who was found not guilty of murder by reason of insanity could not be said to have done the act intentionally, meaning the killer could keep their share in the victim's estate. The court even referenced a similar case in New York. Wife killed husband. She was found not guilty of murder by reason of insanity. Because of that, she did know the nature and quality of her action, and she was able to keep what she received from her husband's estate. Minnesota, Florida, Texas, and California all have similar cases like New Jersey and New York, which allowed the killers to take under the victim's estate. So it seems that Indiana followed the trend of these states. And at the end of the court appeals decision, their opinion, they share, in their opinion, they share, quote, "The result we reach, while firmly grounded in legal precedent, may prove unpalatable to some. However, it is now not our office to find the law one way and hold to the contrary. If law as it now exists is in need of change, that task is for the legislature," end quote. I don't disagree. It's the letter of the law. The letter of the law says X, then the court's responsibility is to take the facts of a case and analyze it against X. It's not the court's responsibility to change X to Y. That's our legislature's responsibility. On a somewhat random side note, but related side note, I've been doing this estate and elder law stuff for many years. I think I'm approaching 13 years now, and I've seen a lot. I've worked on a lot. I've heard a lot. Not to say I've seen everything, because I know better to say that, but I actually worked on an estate case involving a murder. It involved someone, let's call her Sheila, killed her family member, Barbara, and then after killing Barbara, Sheila committed suicide. Long story short, in that case, Sheila's siblings asked the court to not send Sheila's share of Barbara's estate to Sheila's estate since Sheila killed Barbara, and they succeeded. Sheila's estate did not get any part of Barbara's estate. So why is this case different than the earlier case I talked about? Well, since Sheila committed suicide, Sheila was not charged and obviously not convicted. Back to Alan's case, well, Alan's sisters, Linda and Janet, actually argued against Alan's position. Alan's position being that because he was not convicted by reason of insanity, that he could receive his parents' estate share. And Linda and Janet cited a case that was very similar to the case I'd actually just shared. It was not that case, but super similar facts. And in that case, a husband killed his wife, and then the husband committed suicide. In doing so, he avoided prosecution. And like the case I actually personally worked on, he was not charged nor convicted. Now, the Supreme Court in this case about the husband and wife ultimately said that the husband's estate should not receive any benefit from his wife's estate, regardless of a conviction or not. And here, there was not of course, any kind of conviction because he committed suicide. In their opinion, they anchored to interpreting the Slayer's Rule, but sort of adding in a dose of equity into the statute. So if I interpret all of this, the biggest difference is that if the killer survives and if the killer is charged but is not convicted due to reason of insanity, meaning he or she did not understand the quality and nature of his or her act, the killer may be able to take under the victim's estate. But if the killer is convicted or is not convicted, but due to a reason like the killer committed suicide, the killer cannot take under the victim's estate. And perfect time for a reminder, every court can interpret things differently and every state can make different rules, guys. So this is just kind of, it kind of reminds me of a bar exam question, honestly. So if we go all the way back to the beginning of this episode, and we're talking about Taylor Swift's anti-hero song lyrics. I have this dream. My daughter-in-law kills me for the money. She thinks I left them in the will. What do you think now about these lyrics? Well, my brain first goes to, okay, well, if it's a daughter-in-law, meaning it's the in-law and not the actual child. If it's the daughter-in-law, would the victim's child not be able to inherit given everything we just learned if the child actually did not do the murder? Would that be a case of first impression if something like that happened? Heck, there's probably a case out there somewhere in the United States where the in-law killed. So that would be, the first level to analyze. The relationship between the killer and the victim, and would the actual child be punished for what the child's spouse did? That's that first level I'm referring to. And then the second level would be that conviction prong. Is the in-law convicted? And if yes, the Slayer's Rule would likely apply and say the killer cannot inherit. If not, why was the in-law not convicted? Is it by reason of insanity or because they had committed suicide? We just talked about those situations here. So a lot to think about and analyze, right? And I guess thanks for the contribution, Taylor Swift, on bringing this topic up for us to talk about here on Legal Tea. Alrighty, let's wrap this episode up. Next week, we are back to the celebrity estate planning type of episode. And during those types of episodes, we dive into a celebrity or a big name person that has passed away. And we go into how their estate looked from an estate planning perspective. Next week's episode is someone that needs absolutely no introduction. It's Marilyn Monroe. Everyone knows who Marilyn is. And if you don't know who Marilyn is, you've certainly seen pictures of her. So tune in next week for an episode on her and her estate. Talk to you then.